Episode 3. We're not sure who's going first here. Episode 3, 3 weeks in a row. We're knocking these out. So welcome to episode 3 of the Agent Boost podcast. We're going to get going here. Today we wanted to talk a little bit about contractually you as an agent, what that means when you're actually contracting with an FMO, and also get into the hot topic of releases and agent releases, because I think we have some unique insight into how that works. And so if we have time, we'll also get into another hot topic that you'll have to go listen further in the episode to see if we get into it.
Yeah, that's true, right? So let's talk first on contracts and releases. So understand that in all my years of doing this, I think that a lot of agents, and I'm talking about brokers specifically, those independent agents that are out there, most insurance companies will not appoint you directly with the company, meaning that they use distribution partners in order to do their contracting and onboarding. United Healthcare, I'll just use an example. They will let agents contract directly with them, and if you do, you're called an ICA, an independent career agent, and you're captive to just selling their products. Humana has some models too with market point career agents, but again, if you're directly contracted with them, you are captive to their products, right? So whenever you want to be an independent agent and you want to sell for multiple carriers, multiple companies, you typically have to go through a distribution partner. So in our business, we call them FMOs, IMos, NMOs, NMAs,
What do those acronyms stand for? Because I think there's a lot of people don't even know what those are.
Right. So like it's a very acronym-heavy industry, right? So NMO, National Marketing Organization, NMA, a National Marketing Alliance. But IMO, an insurance marketing organization. So, I mean, you kind of pick the acronym, but essentially all they're really doing is every carrier is labeling their distribution partner as such, right? So an agent, picks their FMO, IMO, whatever, contracts with multiple carriers. And what happens is that distribution partner has certain rights, privileges, duties, responsibilities in that contract. And so the agent agreement isn't always directly with that insurance company. And so, to that point, we'll talk on another podcast about what those, insurance companies are actually expecting for you as the independent contractor, what those duties are that you're supposed to be performing as an independent agent. But for today, we'll stick to just kind of that releases. And, agents always ask, well, why is it up to some other entity? Why do they get to control my destiny, or why do they have any say-so over, if they're going to release me or let me go somewhere else? So maybe break that down, Mike. Explain, why would an FMO have some say over whether an agent comes or goes?
Yeah, so first, just like to clarify, usually hierarchy stuff, right? Because a lot of people don't know who they're aligned with or how they're aligned with or how many different layers they're under, which is very nebulous sometimes. Typically an NMA or NMO, usually United Healthcare and Molina have that designation. That's the top, right? That's usually direct with...
Yeah, WellCare, NMO, yeah.
Direct with the carrier. And then there's an FMO level that's kind of verbiage from the old, supplement days and life insurance days, and that's usually a level under. Then you've typically got like an SGA-ish. Some carriers call it differently than an MGA, Master General Agency, and then a GA, and then an agent street level, right?
Yeah, when we talk Aetna, they have a ton of levels. They are like LMO, then it's GMO, then it's MMO and RMO, and they all stand for something, but essentially to break it down for someone so they understand, we'll call it like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and really it's the higher the contract level, the higher the dollar amount, and usually the higher the production requirement. Also, sometimes, like with those higher levels, carriers want to see somebody have a larger footprint, usually multiple states or nationwide, or a number of ready-to-sell agents. So some carriers, the way they base these contracts are all like multiple variables sometimes.
And it's not universal across the industry, right? Each carrier has their own rules and their own verbiage, what they call it.
Yeah, and if you're a large org, you have a lot more, rules set in place. You can control and dictate that. What you find is the smaller carriers who are just getting going, they're going to typically be a little bit more loose about their standards, meaning that if I'm a large, insurance company, one of the big 3 or 4, they may say, in order to get our top level contract, you need to have 5,000 licensed and ready to sell agents. You need to sell product in all 50 states, and you have to hit 15,000 enrollments a year in order to qualify for this contract. Whereas for that same dollar amount, you can go to a local small carrier or a regional carrier, and they may say, hey, our requirements for our top contract is 100 agents, and we only want to have 500 or 1,000 sales per year in order to get our top contract level. So it's not...
That's pretty generous. Usually it's like you're an agent that writes some business. Sure, you're an FMO now, and you have the same contract level as these big guys.
And what actually is very frustrating is you'll see, I know sometimes the smaller carriers, they cry foul in the industry about it, but at the same time, they're actually usually the biggest offenders where, in order to get these higher contracts, we have to exhibit a compliance officer on staff. We have to go through annual FDR audits. We have to have everything from PHI compliance, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3
physical
compliance.
Security to location.
I mean, our audits are pretty rigorous, and so we have to go through that. And then you'll see a smaller carrier go dole out, an FMO contract to a group of 5 or 10 agents that write 300 apps a year. They don't have a compliance officer. They don't have technology. They don't have data security or controls or any of these other things. And yet they're handing out a top-level contract to a small, what is really like a GA or an MGA. So, that's one thing that happens quite often in the industry as well.
Yeah, so your question was why people would kind of make it nebulous or not contract, right? Or not give people releases. Well, there's two sides to every story, right? And what we see in the industry now more than ever, what's more prevalent is we see a lot of FMO shopping. And so let's say you're an agent and you get contracted with an FMO. What that actually means in general is you're contracting with that agency to act or facilitate on your behalf to physically get you contracted with each individual insurance carrier, okay? And like we just talked about, each one of those carriers has their own process, their own unique set of rules, their own way that they interpret things in the industry. They have, smaller carriers may have one, staff member that physically processes those, or it may go to a national team. You may have to connect that through another upline at some level, but there's a lot of actual work that goes on behind the scenes when you're contracting with an FMO. I think a lot of agents are under the impression that they're contracting with that entity and they sign that initial onboarding document or whatever it is, and that's it. But the reality is that FMO's contracting team is then responsible to go follow each of the guidances and the processes for each individual carrier, whether it be Medicare carriers, ACA carriers, life insurance, and they've got to physically do the paperwork. And a lot of it is, sometimes part of the onboarding package, you're giving permission to go get you set up on their behalf. But a lot of times the agents still need to do some of that work on the back end, go do their certifications, things like that. But each different carrier has its own process.
So let me jump in really quick. I want to clarify some of this to kind of give it more a better example and understanding for people who are maybe listening is, so again, the question that they all have is, well, two sides to every story. Every situation is different, but agents frequently come to us and say, well, I don't understand why my FMO won't give me a release. It's no sweat off their back. Why won't they give me a release? Well, the way the business works, and for us too, if you think about it, we have to usually spend money of some sort to go attract agents, right? People don't just land on our doorstep and say, please onboard me. We have to go spend money to market and advertise. Then we have to pay staff members to talk to agents to help them with onboarding. So we're paying wages to have a recruiter or a sales VP or whoever that may be to help those agents. Then we have to, if we have an agent that says yes, we have to kick that over to our contracting and onboarding team, who we are paying wages to. All these people use systems and technology. And then our staff, if an agent says, yeah, appoint me with these 9 insurance companies, sometimes that's 20 hours of work that we have to pay wages just to kind of get that paper pushed, so to speak, and get the agent aligned. And so before anything happens, as you can see in this illustration, there's still no money. We don't get revenue unless an agent sells. So we really are, that when we say we partner with agents, we really do need to partner with them, have them succeed, have them write business, make money, because that's the only way we make money. So usually, we're somewhere in the hole, anywhere from $400 to $1,000 on an agent, even before they've sold, and then we got to set up their Sunfire and give them access to that system. We got to set up their profile in our CRM. There's a lot of things that we have to build out on the tech side before an agent even goes to market and sells. And so that's why the insurance companies, they understand with this partnership that we have with them that, I shouldn't say partnership, right, for legal stuff. This contractual agreement we have with these insurance companies, that's why they let us choose sometimes or dictate whether we're going to release or not release, because of how financially invested we are putting into these agents and agencies.
Yeah, and no one, no agents generally feel sorry for FMOs, right? Because everyone thinks that FMOs are just printing press, right, making money off the sweat of their backs. But and the reality is that most agents never make any FMO any money. They cost the FMO money. They cost the organization money.
80-20 rule.
Yeah, and there are, there's people called 8% Nation. The statistics are that only about 10% of insurance agents are actually even in the industry 2 years later. So if you take that and extrapolate that out, 90% of the agents that you're doing work for are not going to ever produce any revenue or dollar for not only just the FMO, but the insurance carrier, and the insurance carrier, our insurance carrier partners also have costs because they're also paying staff members, all the things that Dan just talked about what we're paying. These United Healthcares and Humanas and all these carriers are all paying their staff members too, in addition to they've got to pay state appointment fees, yep, usually.
The background checks.
Background checks. So they've got a lot of costs too. So these agents that are going around and they FMO hop and they FMO shop and they go, they get their back and forth between all these different FMOs. All they're doing is causing chaos contractually for themselves. They're getting themselves mired in these different contract scenarios with these carriers. Some of the carriers won't process multiple contracts throughout the year if you're hopping around.
The other caveat to add is most carriers have a rule when you look at their 50 to 100 page documents that will tell you can only change your hierarchy or realign somewhere else once every 12 months. So that's pretty common, just because the same thing. They don't want to go push paper for the same NPN, the same agent 2 or 3 times a year. It's inefficient, and already some of these departments are already backlogged. Some of these big carriers have thousands of agent contracts to process sitting on their desk, so to speak, or in queue. And they don't want to just turn around and re-onboard. If you already have a writing number and you have the ability to sell their product, that's what they want. And so they can understand the situations that are out there and why an agent or an agency has the desire to go somewhere else. And a lot of them have built-in processes where there's an alternate method where they can move. So they do give you that flexibility. But we just wanted to probably at the beginning of this illustrate maybe that other side of the coin and why it is that some of these FMOs aren't so anxious or inclined to give a release to an agent or an agency.
Yeah, so let's say, hypothetically you've gone through this scenario and you're an agent and you just onboarded with a new FMO and you think that your contract should be active, ready to go in a week or 2 weeks. It's usually going to take longer than that depending on your scenario. And even if you're a new agent, let's say you're a virgin agent, you've never been contracted with these carriers before, you just passed your AHIP or you're just starting to do your ACA, it's going to still take 2 to 3 weeks with most carriers to get that processed. But what happens is a lot of agents kind of...
We'll go through another podcast and talk in depth on contracting too, like that.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, you're right. If things are best case scenario, you have one state, you've never been contracted, you're a couple weeks. But the more states you add, the longer your backgrounds take because it's per state. So then you have multiple states and then multiple carriers. It all just takes a lot longer. It's when an agent completes the links or doesn't complete the links. I mean, it can take anywhere from months sometimes for agents to onboard if they're not proactive and also depending on their situation.
Yeah, and so we get agents a lot of time that are, of course they need to make money, and by the time they're through this couple week process, they're already getting antsy and they're looking for other people. They're shopping their FMO. But that scenario, isn't really good for anybody, that churn, because, everybody wants consistency in the industry. They want you to land a home where you're going to be successful, where you can make money, where you have the opportunity to learn the systems. And in addition to everything we just talked about, when an agent asks for a release, all that actually does is it generates more work in addition to what they've already done. So let's say hypothetically, you're an agent that just went through the scenario, you got impatient, your contracts were aligned, you weren't really doing something, you're like, hey, I want to release it, or whatever reason, 2 months down the road, your FMO just went through all this and aligned you, and then you go ask for a release. Well, then that contracting team has to hound that down. They have to go find the principal of the of the agent. In this case, it'd be Dan. We've got to hunt Dan down. He's got to process the paper. We've got to find somebody that has the stamp that can then put extra time into this agent that
so
never made money in the first place.
So to clarify, like I would just throw it out there, like we release agents. So the way we do things is we have our own blackout period. So end of July, that's like August 1st moving forward, we just call it a blackout for Agent Boost, just because that's the time when agents should be getting their game plan ready, their certs should be done, they should be locked and loaded, so to speak, getting ready for AEP. So if agents do request a release, we grant them. We just kick it forward to January. And then if agents want a release, we give them a release right after sales season, right? That's how we do it. And then the other two things I wanted to bring up is we need to talk about reciprocal releases.
Yeah.
Also, top of hierarchy. This is important too, because frequently we talk to agents and they're like, I'm working with my friend Bob, who is an agency owner, and I have a pre-release or I got a release from Bob. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter if Bob wants to release you. Usually, whoever the top of hierarchy is, if Bob only has 50 agents and Bob is tied to another big, large FMO or IMO, they're ultimately the one that has the power to release an agent or not release an agent. And that is probably one of the biggest things that in our industry, agents don't understand. And they've been kind of, for lack of a better word, screwed in the sense that, this mid-tier agency they're working with, they like them or whatever. Maybe they're going through challenges business-wise. They're looking for technology solutions. They want more support. And they're like, hey, no offense to Bob, my friend. He's been really good, but I just need more support than what I'm getting. I need something else. And then when they try to leave, the release that Bob gives them on letterhead is no good because it's whoever that top big FMO is holding the contract with the insurance company. So that's something that I would just throw out there as far as information. It's important who's that top of hierarchy, who actually can grant the release or not grant the release, just so that you don't get caught in one of those scenarios.
Yeah, and what I see typically is most agents have no idea who their direct path with each carrier is. It's very, very probably uncommon or rare that some of these FMOs or NMAs like us are direct all the way directly to the carrier and are able to facilitate that release on their own paper. And I see all the time, like Dan said, my GA gave me a release, but then the MGA tries, won't release it. And then they kick it up to the FMO, and then the FMO's under, one of these, an integrity or an AmeriLife partner. And then this contract was brokered out or muled out through this other entity. Yep. And then it just gets really convoluted and agents get frustrated. They give up. And I don't want to say it's purposefully like that to be convoluted, but a lot of times you get a little bit of that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other going, well, I would release you, but this person won't. Or I would release you, but this person won't. And eventually it just drags out a lot of times. So
the other thing that happens too is there are deadlines and certain, like I mentioned, blackout periods. Carriers have blackout periods too. And I'll be straight with you. I've seen it before. I think that in general, most of the FMOs, just like most of the agents, I think most of the agents in the industry have great intentions. I think that they are honest and hardworking. The majority, there's always bad actors. And I think it's the same way in the FMO space. I think in general, most are trying to be ethical, to be honest. They're putting their best foot forward. I think there's a lot of factors that agents don't understand. I will say that there are definitely some bad apples out there, but the lion's share of them are good, ethical people trying to do their best.
And we typically see that at the sub-agency level way more. Right. The ones that are the top of hierarchy, I mean, there's maybe 20 entities that are our size or larger in the country. And, I mean, they're all generally great owner-operators, great people.
Most of them are people that we see at events. We talk to each other. We commiserate. We are very friendly with most of the FMO people out there.
Correct. And it's not this, like, angstful fighting thing, Crips in the blood type thing where you're out there at the top. A lot of times it's the people that are behaving badly or these sub-level entities or these people that are contracting people, and it's purposefully convoluted for them and they don't know who they're actually aligned with. So
going back to blackout periods, and I kind of derailed a little bit talking about good characters and bad characters, but we find that with these blackout periods, all these carriers will institute their own rules. And part of it is, just so that you all understand, is these companies want to deploy their own internal company resources to having a successful sales season. So if you're selling health products, health, Medicare, you all know, fall is the open enrollment or annual enrollment period. And so they're going to be shifting around as many as their company resources to facilitate sales and support. So they don't want to be having all these agent contracts that they're having to spend time, and they don't want to be recontracting people who are already onboarded. So it's a resource, strategy is really what it is. And you will see that there are FMOs that we all know the deadlines. Like, we know if you're with a big FMO, we have a board we keep with every single carrier. We know exactly where their cutoff or blackout period is, what day we have to put everything through to get an agent aligned before the sell season. And every FMO does. And so sometimes you're finding the deadline is, July 31st or something or whatever it may be. And you're calling the FMO on July 30th. It's really common for them to be like, oh, they're out of the office until next week. We'll get back to you next week. As soon as they're back in the office, and you're missing that blackout window. That some of that stuff is purposeful, candidly, but you all, I would say, as agents, should have like the onus. I'm a geek. I read through all the EDC manuals, all the guides. Cigna calls it the rules of the road. United Healthcare calls it their EDC manual. Everybody has these guides, and you should be knowledgeable and know what the rules are with every carrier.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to give some context to the industry about. Dan and I will give people a release because it does us no good to jam somebody up that legitimately either it wasn't a good fit business-wise, they found somehow a better opportunity, and realistically, we want people to win, right? Whether that's with us or somebody else. So we give people releases. We don't get asked for release very often, to be honest, but when we do, if it's within that frame of the year where we'll give an open release, we just quickly process that, wish you the best of luck on the way. On the other side of things,
there's a caveat though, right? Let's talk about it. So for every 400 to 500 agents we onboard, we'll probably get about 5 to 10 release requests. And it's common. We get those. Sometimes it's because, hey, there's this FMO has a local office or whatever else. They can support me better. They have this brick and mortar. I got provided like this doctor clinic or whatever with this group. And I mean, there's circumstances that arise. We totally get it and say, yeah, go do it. When we don't release agents, it's usually or agencies, we've given them marketing dollars to grow their business in a very recent period of time. Like, let's say the last, 3 months, we've given thousands and thousands of dollars to an agent or agency to grow their business. And then within a very short period of time, they're asking us for a release. We won't do that unless they recoup or return those funds. That is the caveat to which we think is very, very reasonable, where we won't release. And then the other time period is when they've just onboarded, we've just gotten their stuff processed. Like, again, I changed my mind. Mm-hmm. And we literally just processed their contract, spent 20 staff hours to do it, or whatever else. And they haven't even given us a 30 or 60 day window to support them yet. Those are typically the only caveats where we won't provide the release immediately. And when we do provide releases, we give an unconditional release.
Yes.
So essentially, we unconditionally release you. We don't care if you go to the carrier, this FMO, that FMO, anywhere you want to go is fine by us. We don't stipulate it. Here you go. Wish you well.
Yeah, so let's talk about how that works usually for us, right? The benefactor on the other side. We almost never get a release, an open release from another insurance agent. 2% and it happens all the time. It happened today. We'll bring on an agent and they're like, oh yeah, I can get a release. My guy told me he would. They'll contract with us and then they'll go ask for that. And I would say almost never. Maybe 1 out of 200 agents we bring on will actually have a release that's an open, unconditional release that we're able to process and immediately use to go to the carriers and get that agent. So I would say it's like a 50-to-1 ratio of of us actually operating in good faith and giving an agent an open release and others in the industry actually releasing somebody to us, or we'll get the reciprocal release, which is, essentially a prisoner swap.
Yeah, we call it a hostage negotiation or a prisoner exchange.
Which is really funny because I don't know if maybe our other FMO partners or competitors out there, if they have like a file where, they bank all, they're like, well, here's our file of our 7 get out of jail free. Yeah. We've got our 4 agent boost release hostage requests over here, and we've got ours with this other carrier over here. But we don't even care about a reciprocal release.
We don't keep track of that stuff because at the end of the day, here's what happened. Years and years ago when we were trying to figure things out, we used to do that too because it was kind of an industry standard almost, this reciprocal release, meaning that, hey, FMO X, Y, and Z over here. Well, FMO X is pretty good, so we released an agent over there. They release an agent to us. That's reciprocal, or we reciprocate. We release agents back and forth to each other, and there would be like a document they'd sign first to say, hey, Agent Boost Marketing agrees to release this agent to FMO X, and FMO X agrees to release to Agent Boost, like 1-to-1, like a swap, and there was a document. And again, like I said, it's ridiculous we didn't track it. What would happen, and this is why we don't even care and don't do it anymore, is we would sign those reciprocal agreements all the time. We don't care. The agents can go. And then when I went to go cash that ticket in, so to speak, with an FMO, and I'm like, hey, I need this agent. I need to onboard him. Remember, I released 3 agents to you. I want this one. Oh, sorry, we can't facilitate that because that agent's under an MGA or a GA or somebody, and they don't want to release. So sorry, we can't do that because it's not a direct agent. And so the reciprocal was
almost every time.
Yeah, it was never worth the paper that it was written on, and it was worthless. So we don't care about that crap, and we don't do the reciprocal releases.
We will sign them for an agent if like their upline gives us a reciprocal release. We'll sign that if that's what they want, because again, we don't really care about the old prisoner swap, because a lot of times it's like the old U.S. subbing out Brittany Griner for the Merchant of Death to Russia or whatever it was. It usually is not a fair.
It's a bad trade.
A fair exchange of prisoner swapping, right? And so that's just one of those old antiquated things. So let's talk about. I'm going to give you some advice if you're an agent that wants to get a release, and let's talk about call center agents too.
Oh yeah,
because that's something.
Before we do, let's do it now.
Okay.
Call center are different. If you've worked at like some of the bigs, I'm not going to name all the names, but you know, there's some bigs out there. Be very, very, very cautious about working at those big call centers, because typically you'll have an employment agreement, and almost never do you see, and there's one in particular that's just god-awful horrendous, and I don't even mind saying it, but they just won't release you at all, even though you don't work there. It doesn't matter if you voluntarily quit. It doesn't matter if they riff you. It doesn't matter if they fire you for performance. A lot of times you just are out, here you go, too bad, so sad. And then when you go to contract with an FMO, there's no concessions given to you, so you can't get a release. And so you can never onboard quickly with another entity. You have to go through a slower process. So be careful about the big call centers. And now, one of the reasons that they do that, I will say,
let's give some color to that.
I will give
we
some,
do it because there's a little bit. We understand that.
The reason that the call centers don't want to release you is because if they're paying you your commissions and you're selling high volume in those call centers, they're paying you commission for making those sales. And then we also see that those call centers have high drop-off rates, right? Rapid disenrollments, clawbacks, chargebacks, whatever you want to call it. And so they don't want to hand you a release and let you go while they just paid you your commissions, and then you're going to have 40% of your policies fall off the books over the next 90 days, right? So that's...
Well, there's a couple other reasons too why they do it, right? When you're a new agent and you onboard with one of these call centers, typically they're going to license you with a lot of states, usually 20 to 30 states at least, sometimes all 50 states if you're a good agent.
So they're $5,000 in licenses?
Yeah, $5,000 to $10,000, your training fee. So by the time you're like ready to sell with some of these call centers, they've probably invested somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 in you. Mm-hmm. And, they're not going to just turn around and go, well, I just paid to get you licensed and all these things. Here's an open release. The other reason why they do it, guys, is because a lot of those agents that work for these big call centers think that those clients are their clients.
Yep.
They are not. They are not your clients. They are the call center's clients. They are that entity that you are an LOA agent
That's
for.
their asset.
They own those policies. And so what happens is some of these agents, they're always thinking, well, that's my client. I helped Martha. I helped Mary.
And here's what happens too. Depending on the carrier, some of them are better than others, but some, even though you're not the agent of record and it's not your policy and you don't own it, some portals will give you access to view the membership and you have visibility on it. And so the agents just say, oh, well, that's my client. It is not, even if you have visibility.
Yeah, so if you're a disaffected or disgruntled call center employee and you just quit or you got fired or whatever, and you're like, well, I'm going to stick it to these guys and I'm going to download my book of business, or I've been keeping track of it. If they send you out the door with an open release, they're also concerned that you're immediately going to go, contract with somebody else, start flipping that business, and then they have to go, after you and pursue you legally and expend more resources to do that. So that
and honestly, I would tell you, I've seen it.
Yeah.
I have seen it. Agents do it, and again, going back to.
And we've seen people pursue people for it too.
I don't think that the majority of agents are bad characters. Again, I think most of them are good, very honest and ethical people. But because of those bad characters, those bad agents, and the way that they do that, you can have one agent do that and go kind of flip a book or something like that and stick it to one of these call centers to the tune of $100,000 or more of what is their asset, their book of business. And, you just get a couple of them doing that. And before you know it, those call centers are going to be very reactionary to protect their asset, right?
Yep. So there's that whole side of it too. So let's talk about, well, what can you do if you were a field agent that's encumbered with some other FMO, or you were a call center employee or an LOA employee somewhere else, and you leave and you want to go set up with an FMO? What is the best process to actually get a release? Okay.
Yeah. So here's what we always recommend. We always say, like, when you're serious, when you've made a decision, your decision is made, you're going to align with a new FMO. And it could be for, financial support, that you're getting more resources, you have a better opportunity, the technology is better, whatever the reasons are, you've made up in your mind that you're going to go to this new FMO. I would tell you, usually the carriers now have an alternative process, I'm referencing, Aetna has a form that you can complete and send it in without a release of the immediate and top of hierarchy, and you can start processing
a self-release or an agent release.
Yeah, self-release process. Or United Healthcare has a process where you send off an email. Same with Humana. You send an email or you fill out a form, send it in, and it begins processing and it begins the clock. If it's a 90-day wait period or a 180-day wait period, that clock starts ticking. I always recommend and tell agents, do that first. That way you're serious, you're committed. When you go back to talk to your FMO and say, hey, look, I've already made my decision. It doesn't matter what you tell me. It doesn't matter if you finally decided now you're going to give me money. You haven't for 3 years, but now suddenly you want to give me money. It doesn't matter. My mind's made up. Please do the right thing. Let me have my release now. That way, look, I've already put in my intent. That way you've already done the action. You've already put in the effort. It's already moving down the tracks. And, you're just saying, at least, give me a good experience leaving out the door. If things don't work out, I would come back. Let me leave on a positive note. That's usually how I encourage agents to go about that process.
Yeah, one more thing too. I would say it's very important for you, if you do want to release, to own up to that and have the courage to, if you've been working with a person that's invested any sort of time, effort, or money into you, you owe it to that person, in my opinion, to at least go to them and have that upfront conversation and say, hey, I appreciate what you've done for me. I recognize that you've done this, this, and this, but I need to go here for this reason.
Yep.
Will you please, facilitate this for me, make it easy? I'll give you a positive review on my way out the door or something like that. Yep. And try to solve it with, some
I would
some
also,
honey.
Yeah, to kind of to your point, the other thing that is extremely frustrating about that process when an agent does want to release, be professionals, right? I always say the best thing you can do, especially with hard conversations, and this is anything in leadership, it's if I need to coach somebody, if there's a compliance issue, a major issue, the best way you can always handle it, in person is the best route. If you can't, over the phone. Then if you can't do the phone, then it's text or whatever, but email, last resort. So what we'll get is an agent, and I think what Mike's alluding to is sometimes you have an agent you've known for 2 years, you've been extremely invested in them, you've helped them with, business planning, you've funded their initiatives, you go the extra mile, you do everything for them, and you get, after the end of a 3-year relationship, an email that says, I'm requesting a release. It's no, you should, I don't think, people should break up via text, with their boyfriend or girlfriend. A text breakup, that's the most lame and pathetic thing I've ever seen or heard, right? So same thing, if you're going to break up with your FMO, at least be the professional and have a conversation and a dialogue. It will get you so much further.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we have a list of agents who, I'm sure feel scorned too, but that we feel have kind of scorned us on the way out the door. And, there's a few agents where I'm
to Mike's thing that I can count on my hand the number of scorned agents that I've had in 12 years of doing this.
Correct.
I can count on one hand the number of agents.
Yeah. And guys, it's I told an agent this today that was going to onboard. Most of the FMOs are going to be pretty good. Most of the FMOs, you as an agent are going to be able to have success with, okay? You need to align. And I told the story last week about when I aligned with my first FMO, I didn't even know what to expect or what they would do. I just figured it was all on me anyway.
Right.
And there's been a lot of evolution in the industry right now where it's like a lot of agents expect their FMO to solve everything and be everything. And that's what we deal with on the FMO side more than anything. And part of that's been a situation of the competitive nature of, FMOs trying to recruit, and they want to grow their distribution, and they want to grow their downline. So it's like, well, we'll offer this and we'll offer this. And then it becomes there's almost this like expectation, or I don't want to say entitlement, but there's this environment where the agents are like, well, it's not my responsibility to run my business. It's not my responsibility to solve these things. It's your responsibility as an FMO to show me what to do, to teach me a thing, to pay all the tools. And then if you're lucky, you might be lucky enough to make some override dollars when I produce,
Yeah. And to kind of touch on that as well, agents are in an environment more where they want and expect the FMO to do a whole lot more. I mean, honestly, that is the thing. They want us to solve everything for them. The more that agents hop around into different hierarchies, and it's almost like if you look into Marx and you see somebody that's like a decent person, you're like, oh damn it, they've been on 5 plans in the last 3 years. Same thing with an agent. If you hear from them, they said like, oh, I've been with 5 FMOs and they all suck. You're like, okay, I don't know. Maybe that one was bad, but if you're on your 5th and they're all bad, there might be a commonality here. But that's the other thing is the more and more you jump around, there is time and labor and effort from the agent too to get to know that FMO and understand like their systems, their technology. How do I order leads? How do I download this list? How do I check my book of business? How do I, there's so many little nuances to every little FMO and how their systems work that by the time you're just getting comfortable and proficient with how they're doing it, you're already on to a new FMO, spending more time and labor doing that and not out producing and selling and growing your business. So I always tell agents like, look, even if things aren't perfect, you're better off to just pick a lane and go, and just go and grow your business. If things are significantly bad, sure, you should be looking for another FMO. But again, try to avoid that as much as possible because, you're just going to give yourself a whole lot more administrative work and you're not going to be making more income.
Yeah. So one last kind of piece of advice that I would give is if you're new or you're onboarding onto an FMO, make sure you know which carriers that you're getting contracted with. Okay. Like make a list, make a spreadsheet, whatever. I have a list as an agent of all my different carriers, what my login is, what the upline is or was, what the password is, and then it's your responsibility in addition to that FMO's contracting team to make sure that you're being proactive because some of those things you're going to need to do on your own. You're going to have to go in and check and do the certifications. Some of your contracts won't go live until you've uploaded your AHIP or done your certifications or done your FFM or whatever it is that you need to do. You need to be proactive too in working in concert as a partnership with the FMO to make sure you're getting aligned with those carriers. And if you do that, it's going to get you up and going a lot faster. You're going to have a lot more idea of what's going on. You're going to be a lot more organized when you go, actually you're ready to sell and you start sitting down and writing business.
Yeah, I guess one of my things I would say in wrap up and just closing it all, at the end of the day, I've seen agents who are wildly successful with terrible FMOs. And, at the end of the day, if you're good at being an independent agent. You're good at finding, lead vendors, investing in your business, investing in yourself professionally to learn the industry, adapt, to know more, to become better. And you're out there working your butt off, putting in the time and the work and the effort. You can be with any FMO essentially and still be wildly successful. And so the FMO partner is certainly important to delivering you different tools and technology and support, and they're going to help and enhance and augment your business. But the message is that it's not only relying upon the FMO. 90% of it's going to be on you as the agent and the effort that you're putting into your own business that's going to make you successful.
Yep. So hopefully that gave you guys some context and clarity to, contracts, uplines, how it works, kind of a sneak peek into the back end, and some tips and tricks for if you guys ever find yourself in a situation where you're needing a release or aligning with a new FMO.
Yep.
Cut.
Agent Boost.